heel strike dissertation. I've put a tremendous amount of time and energy into this. This is such a hot topic, such a controversial, or in my mind, just misunderstood. But I want to shed some light on this. I want to offer perspective. And again, if you don't know me, I am a teacher, not a preacher. I'm sharing with you what I know from as a runner, as a physical therapist, treating for a long time, reverse engineering, thinking like a scientist, experimenting, and just breaking this down, whittling this down to the basic elements to try to help my understanding so I can help share this information. So if you're happy and healthy, I'm happy. Whatever you choose to land on, that's fine with me as long as you're happy and healthy. But I want to try to clear the air, offer some context, offer some perspective, and offer what I believe is the most efficient and effective way to move forward. And what elements does that hold? This is going to be longer form. I don't want to rush this. I don't feel like I do as good a job explaining if I'm in a rush. So this is the longer form content breakdown. I will have subsequent videos of smaller form breaking it down even more. So buckle up. Let's do this. Yes, the agenda. First, we're going to go over the heel strike argument, or HS for heel strike, if you will. We're going to present both sides, pros, cons, what's commonly been taught and said. And I'm going to go over two main points, MP, for heel striking. Then I'm going to go over running economy. This is our framework. This is going to be a relatable concept that we can then apply this information to something you already know and understand, so that way we can expedite learning. Then we're going to go over the bottom line, overuse injuries. This is our non-negotiable. Too much too soon, causing injuries. Doesn't matter how fast you are. If you're injured, that has to be our first priority. When it comes to the perspective that I look at this from a physical therapist, performance will come, speed will come, but we need to make sure that we're staying safe while we're doing it. So we'll have the bottom line. Then we'll go over main point 1, main point 2, promoting heel striking when it's appropriate and when it's not. Context matters, the devil's in the details. We'll talk about other foot strike situations or considerations. When may it be appropriate to land on something other than your heel? What's the difference in terrain, incline, decline? We'll go over that. And then I'll offer a summary and my final thoughts to kind of bring it home. So without further ado, let's get into it. The argument against heel striking. Landing on the heel bone slows you down and amplifies force through the legs. Shin, knee, hip, all the way up. And this is true in the right context. I'm hopefully going to kind of paint the picture that it's more about where you land in relationship to your body versus what part of your foot. And we'll break that down in other circumstances. But the braking, the overstriding, it's been called, landing on your heel slows you down. That force, every action, equal and opposite reaction, reverberates up the chain, hitting your shins, hitting your knees, hitting your heel, and your spine. And that can lead to too much too soon, knee injury, shin splints, you name it. So here's the case for heel strike. Listen close. When the proximity of the body's center of mass and base of support is optimal, i.e. leaning, heel striking maximizes running economy. We're going to break that down. But overall, big picture, under the circumstances when the lean's right, when the relationship between my center of mass and my landing foot and the base of support, when it's optimal, heel striking maximizes running economy. And we'll break all that down. Let's go over the two main points for heel striking. There's the long-winded version, but we're going to break that down. It maximizes, heel striking maximizes forward momentum, minimizing braking and slowing down, and heel striking maximizes forward or horizontal distance between steps. Running economy. This is going to be the analogy that we're going to lay out for the framework to continue to justify and break down some of these ideas and the concepts. So here it is. Some of you have seen this before, but I've expanded upon it. Paying on the principle. Paying on the principle is another form or term for running economy or efficiency of movement. So here it is. Imagine you have a house and you have a mortgage. Each month you have to make a payment. That payment, we're spending money. That's our currency. You have some of the money that you're spending is going towards that principal of going towards the mortgage, paying off the house, and some's going towards the interest to the bank. So same concept, but now with running is about moving forward, point A to point B. We're running a full marathon in this example. We're not expending money, but we are expending energy. And we have that energy can either go towards the goal of helping to assist and promote forward movement, paying the principal, and or it can be going towards the interest, that movement, whether it's our propulsion, how we're leaning, anything that doesn't contribute to forward movement is paying on the interest. So therefore, our goal is to maximize payments on the principal and minimize payments on the interest. How high can we get? How leaned out can we get where we're spending as much, expending or spending, whichever example, as much as possible going towards the principal. Minimize the interest. So same concept. Let's zoom in. Let's break it down even a little bit more. So in this example, we're dissecting running. This is our framework. This is our analogy we're going to keep coming back to. We're dissecting running into just one step, from one foot to the next, my body translating forward. There's thousands of these steps in a mile, 2 miles, and so on. The longer the distance, the more the steps. And so we're going to break down this one individual step to apply this concept. So the payment, the muscles, the energy exerted is from the muscles. That's how we move. Our muscles are our movers. For us to move, muscles contract, they shorten, we get movement. But that's at a cost. So then we're going to ask, what percentage of the muscles that are being active are contributing to forward movement? That's the principle, going towards the house. Or what percentage of the muscles are contributing to upwards movement or vertical or paying on the interest? So of that payment, and we'll have an example breaking this down, it's going towards the principal or going towards the interest. We're not done yet. We still have to pay taxes. Good old Uncle Sam. There's no getting out of it. No matter what, when we land, anytime we go from flight phase, which is running, where both feet are off the ground, to landing with one foot in front of our body, no matter what, every action equal and opposite, it's going towards our center of mass. There's going to be some braking forces that happen. So our goal is to minimize, lower taxes as much as possible, maximize forward momentum, and minimize the amount of braking from the ground. And what that's going to give us when this is all said and done is our running economy, our efficiency of forward movement. I'm a visual person. I hope you are too. So let's get some visuals on this. When the payments occur, when the taxes occur. So here's what it looks like on the right-hand side when we're paying on the principal, when we're seeing when we leave the ground, how we move forward, moving horizontal. This is what it looks like. I find where my head is at the highest point, ideally that back toe is still on the ground. And what that then tells me is then when I leave the ground, I'm moving horizontal, not up and horizontal. Versus on the left, when we're paying on the interest, when we're going up, when I find peak vertical, if I go frame by frame where my head's at the highest position, if I look that back toe, it's off the ground. If we would have went a few frames before that, we'd see once the foot came off the ground, once I was airborne, I continued to move higher in vertical and horizontal. Next, paying taxes, the ground, good old Uncle Sam. This is what it looks like when we're paying the least amount of taxes to the most. On the far right here, when we have that slight forward lean, when we have the appropriate relationship, proximity of my body and the foot, that's when we're paying the least amount of taxes. Versus when we got a little bit more, I'm leaning, but if you notice where I'm leaning from, I'm hinging at the hips. My shoulders are going out in front, my hips are going backwards, so therefore my center of mass, my body is still back, so I'm still landing and loading in front, slowing more, braking more, paying slightly more taxes. And the highest amount of taxes is that far left where I'm not leaning at all. I'm straight vertical, if not even a little bit arched back. Therefore, all my weight is behind me and my feet are out in front. And that's no leaning, that's where we're paying the greatest amount of taxes. So we went into this zoom in approach, dissecting. Let's do a little bit more of a broad view, zoom out to see where in the gait cycle this is actually occurring. So let's start here with what I call home base. This is where the body, the head, the center of mass is at its lowest point. We see the thighs and the arms are both parallel. This is a relatable position. I'm balanced on one leg. So now I want to see big picture. When I go to leave the ground and load the ground, what happens? So where we're spending, where our initial payment towards either the principal or the bank, where that comes is the propulsion phase when I go to leave the ground. Right here, this is where we're paying either on the principal or the interest. Our next is now once we go to land and load the ground reaction forces coming back at us, slowing our forward momentum. This is where the taxes are paid. So we're going to using this framework, hopefully these visuals will help to understand where and when this occurs. Let's give an arbitrary example. Payment. Let's say with each step, for me to go from point A to point B of just one step, it cost 100 units of energy, we'll say. Of that, 80 is going towards the principal, moving forward. 20 is using muscles that aren't required for moving forward. We're going up. After that, we still have to pay taxes on the ground through all that. With that, let's say we're taxed 10 units. So therefore, our running economy is 70 units, or you could say 70%. So big picture, zoom out, 70% going towards the principal, 30% going towards the interest. So this is where it comes into play. This is what it's all about. Reallocating resources. We have options. We can either decrease our effort, spend less, but maintain the same amount of speed. In this example, instead of $100 being spent, we're only spending 90. And of course, over the long haul, long distance running, endurance, the less we can spend, the more that we can save for the long haul, the better. So I'm spending 90 instead of 100. And my interest rate went from 30% of going towards the interest, not the principal, down to 20%. So we had an increase of 70% of paying on the principal to now 80%. And you can see the example. So my speed stays the same. Exerting less, same speed. An 8:30 minute per mile pace or a 5:17 minutes per kilometer. It stays the same, but with exerting less energy. Next option, we can exert the same amount of effort. We can spend the same amount, still spending $100, but reallocating resources. If we spend less on the interest and we reallocate that towards the principal, going from 70% up to 80%, we can have the same amount of exertion or effort or energy expenditure, but go faster. So now that 8:30 minute per mile pace, 5:17 minutes per kilometer, now goes to an 8-minute per mile pace or 5 minutes per kilometer. So the goal, the reason. What I mainly care about as a physical therapist is you being safe. Running faster and performance can come with time and can come with working on your efficiency, as we'll come to see. But for this first example of exerting less effort but maintaining the same speed, that helps you to run safer. Too much too soon is what's the cause of almost all running related injuries. So if we can maintain the same speed but spend less force, our chances of staying under that injury threshold are greater. Next is the run faster, the sexy. Everyone wants to run faster, right? So in this example, if we can exert the same amount of effort, but by reallocating payments from paying on the interest to now paying on the principal, we can increase our speed, but we're still spending the same amount. That's ideal for running fast. Next up, our non-negotiable, the bottom line, overuse injuries. This is really what everything boils down to, is preventing too much too soon. What is too much? It's force, physical stress. If you go out in the sun, the UV rays that's going to your skin, if you get too much sun too soon, not allowing enough recovery, allowing the adaptation, you get an injury, you get a burn. Too much physical stress to your body every time we hit the ground's hitting us back. Too much of that force is like the sun, too soon, we get injured. But here's the beautiful thing, is the body can adapt. If we give it enough time, if we don't get too much sun exposure, if we allow recovery, next time we go out in the sun, we have more durability. Our tissues are more able to handle that. Same with running and forces and physical stress. If we can slowly adapt to these physical stresses of landing every time we hit the ground, we can try to stay under that injury threshold. So the key with this of reallocating resources is really all about reducing force. How do we do that? How do we get the most force? The higher we go, the further we come down, the more stress. The higher the braking, the decreasing the momentum, the higher the force. So everything that we're doing, all about reallocating these resources to, one, lower the amount of force that you take, put some sunscreen on, go in the shade some, try to reduce the forces to allow adaptation to occur, to prevent injury. So this is what it's all about. Stress, recover, adapt. We're going to be working on reallocating the forces to decrease the amount of stress to help you also stay under that injury threshold. Okay, let's get into the meat and potatoes. Heel strike, main point number 1 of 2, promoting heel strike. First overview, big picture with the quick summary of it, then some foundational knowledge, then breaking down, understanding, and unpacking the why, and then we'll kind of bring it all together. So main point number 1 for heel striking. Heel striking maximizes forward momentum. This has to do with our running analogy, our running economy analogy, is it helps to lower taxes from the ground. Why this is when appropriate leaning. That's so important. And we will be an expert on leaning and bringing the invisible visible and helping the concepts in your mind when it comes to some of this physics. So when appropriately leaning, landing on the heel minimizes braking as it's closer to the runner or my center of mass. The further away that my leg is out in front of me as I'm trying to move forward, the further away, the more braking. On the other end of the spectrum, the closer the contact point of the ground, the base support, is to my center of mass when I'm airborne to landing, the closer they are, we're minimizing braking. If I think to looking down, what part of my foot is closest to my body, closest to my center of mass? Well, it's the heel. The heel is closest. So we'll be unpacking this as we go throughout. But before we do, we talked about heel striking maximizes forward momentum. Let's get just a little bit more of a clear understanding of what momentum is. I know we all know, but just to kind of clarify. Our boy, baby boy, Sir Isaac Newton with the apple. Go back to his first law of motion. An object in motion stays in motion until acted upon by an external force. But what is that external force? We've got gravity constantly pulling us down towards the earth. And then we'll get into Newton's third law: for every action equal and opposite. When we make contact with the ground, that force is coming right back up towards us. So down below, you'll see I use some simple shapes a lot. That's to help to kind of clarify one unit. Thinking of the body as just one unit instead of all these separate individual parts hopefully helps to simplify. So imagine that this block is moving forward. It's in the air, that's the ground, the gray part. Moving forward, green arrows, all's good. Then it springs a leg, and that red line, and makes contact to the ground in front. This is an external force. This is the ground. This is going to slow forward momentum. So the key is the further away, the more we're slowing. The closer, the less. Heel striking helps to minimize braking to maximize forward momentum as the heel is closer, but the key is with the leaning. So let's go into that. These are three fundamental concepts of physics that I want to go over to help explain this. These three are so important. This is pretty much seeing what is the relationship between my body, and if we're talking about my body, where is the summary, the average of where all the weight is most centered, or the average weight location, my center of mass. What's the relationship between my center of mass, the earth, and gravity, this constant pull down towards the earth? Where my body is making contact to the ground, we're going to call that my base of support. So it's all about what's the relationship between all three of these. First, base of support, BOS. Second, center of mass, or COM. We'll be using these symbols. Third is the line of gravity, the pull down towards the earth, or LOG. And so let's go over these quickly with a little bit more some visual and breakdown. All three of these, you can't see them. That's why a lot of times we don't think about them. But if you can start to visualize this, it makes everything so much more clear when it comes to physics and movement and these points. So first, base of support. It's the point of contact of a person with the surface. If you look down at your feet right now, if you were to trace an imaginary kind of circle or oval around your feet, that's your base. That's your base of support, your contact point to the ground. If we look at the image here, feet are closer together. We have a more narrow base of support versus the feet a little bit wider. We have a wider base of support. Which one would be more sturdy? Just to kind of start to kind of get the ball rolling. Imagine if you were out on a raft in the water. Which one do you think you would rather pick? Well, you'd want the wider base of support, the wider raft, to help with your foundation, your sturdiness, your stability, to prevent you from falling. So our base of support is the contact between us and the center of mass. So this is the core of the person, where all the weight, the equal weight, is all distributed. And this is helpful to kind of picture this of where that might be. If you take a person, flip them horizontal, and think, where would I put a pole that they would remain balanced? They would remain horizontal or perpendicular to the ground, not stabbing through them. Don't think like that. It's the center of mass. That's close to where our sacrum is. It's just below the belly button. And this is a good representation of where is the weight equally distributed. Next up, we have the line of gravity. So far we've got our contact points to the ground, our base support. Where is my center of mass, where most of the weight is equally distributed? Now we want to know what's the relationship between these two. The line of gravity is this constant downwards, always downwards towards the earth. And it's always going from my center of mass to the ground. So it depends on where this is in relationship to the base support and the center of mass. This is going to dictate our balance. So when I'm straight up and vertical, if you look at the top-down view here, where my center of mass is and that line of gravity is going down, you can see that my weight, my average weight, my center of mass is right between the arches of my feet. That's where I'm balanced. So the line of gravity, the log, is always going down, straight down towards the earth, the pull of gravity. For the sake of our discussion, this is going to be the only variable that's going to change. It's going to shift. It's going to move. The center of mass is going to stay stationary. The base of support is going to stay stationary. But this line influences our relationship between our body and the ground. Always at all times, subconsciously, you're not thinking about it, but below the surface, we're always trying to be balanced. We're always trying to make sure that our center of mass is balanced, centered over our base support. That line of gravity is going straight down. This is why it's a learned skill to lean forward while running. What happens is normally when we want to lean our body forward, because we don't want to fall, naturally our hips will come back. So it's a learned skill to be able to keep everything stacked on top of each other and merely shift our weight forward, like you see on the right, with the center of mass still being within the base support but not centered. When falls happen, it's when our center of mass goes outside that base support. That's when we'll actually fall over. So it's a learned skill to be able to keep your weight, your center of mass, that line of gravity forward within the base support when we're on the ground and then we're in that flight phase. The kickstand effect. So here's an example where we're going to talk about a stationary object and talk about where the location of the center of mass is in relationship to the base support if we're trying to not fall versus a controlled fall is what we'll get to later. So imagine this is your bike. You've got the line of gravity going straight down. We want to make sure this doesn't fall over. It's slightly tilted. So as of right now, that center of mass is outside the base. But what would happen? It would fall. So what can we do? What can we do to try to make sure that this doesn't fall over? Well, if we expand the base support, have another point of contact, a kickstand, go outside of our center of mass or the center of mass of this motorcycle, and naturally it won't fall over. So if we're trying to stay stationary, if we're trying not to move forward, this is the goal, to have the contact point be outside of our center of mass. But with running, it's this constant forward movement. We're trying not to completely brake. We're trying to have more of this controlled fall. So ideally, anytime the relationship between the center of mass and the base support, any time that they're not within unison, that they're not directly over, that you don't have the center of mass over the base support, that's when we're out of balance. And naturally, as a part of moving forward, with our leg going forward, there's going to be braking that's going to be occurring. As long as the base support is in front of our body, in front of our center of mass, there's going to be braking. So if you look at this example here, we've got airborne rectangle, and then as it makes contact with the ground in front, if you look down, you see where the new base support is, because we're airborne. We see where the center of mass is, and the distance between the center of mass and the base support, that entire time, until we get to this image on the right, where the center of mass is directly over the base support, there's going to be braking forces or slowing forces that occur. The further the distance between the center of mass and the base of support, the greater the amount of braking. Greater distance, greater braking, more braking, more problems, as Newton puts it very wisely. So let's correlate this to a running visual. So if you look, we've got still the simple shapes down below and the running up above. So as long as that lead leg, the front foot, as long as it's in front of the line of gravity of the center of mass, braking is going to be occurring. And that's why our goal is going to be to minimize the amount of braking that occurs here. This is the taxes. This is why no matter what, we have to pay on the taxes, but our goal is to minimize. Until we get to this point, that home base, that mid stance, lowest point, arms and thighs are parallel and equal, where our center mass is directly over the base of support. This is the point where it stops braking. Braking does not continue to occur. So let's pull it all together with another visual, a braking visual. Again, we can't see these things, so it's good to bring these to life. I use the tennis ball necklace a lot. If you're not familiar, I take a tennis ball, fill it with pennies, put a shoelace around it, wear around the runner's neck, measure near their center mass, near their belly button. And what we'll see if somebody is braking, when they're braking, as they land and load with their foot out in front, as that body, their base support's out in front of their body, they stay back. The body continues to stay back and slow, but the ball doesn't. The ball keeps moving forward. And then the ball will come back and hit them. So that's going to be that cue, the sound, the feeling. If we're braking, the ball continues to move forward and comes back. This is happening with each and every step. If we look at this top-down view, just like we did with the kickstand, if we look at where the center of mass is, if you'll notice that the light gray shoe print is representing that it's airborne, it's off the ground. And then the only point of contact when landing with the yellow footstep with the blue base support around it, where the center mass is behind, as long as it's behind, as long as the foot's out in front using the body as the reference point, this is where that braking is going to be occurring until we get to that level point where center of mass is directly over the base support. So this is our aha moment. No matter what, with running, with walking, there's always going to be braking forces. We always have to pay taxes. The only way to have no braking at all is if I'm in that position where my center of mass is directly over my base support and I squat down and jump up at the air and land. That's the only way to land directly underneath your center of mass. Otherwise, there's always going to be some braking that's going to occur. So if you've been following me for a while, you know I love a good analogy. I try to create these to make this information simple, easy to digest, easy to implement. So without further ado, let me introduce CEO and the boss analogy when it comes to understanding these three components of physics, and then how this helps to explain main point one, promoting heel striking to increase forward momentum. Here we go. CEO Cleo, he represents the center of mass. He's the leader. Then we have Boss Betty, or the base of support. Both are on the same team, but CEO Cleo, he's a leader. He's driven. He likes to be out in front. And actually, when he's out in front, things do move faster. Versus Boss Betty, she's more a frontline. She's still upper level management. Great job. She's worked her way up over the years, but she's a little bit more grounded, a little bit more balanced. The two work in unison. And so here's the typical dynamics. If Boss Betty is out in front, she's out leading, it affects the power dynamics. It slows team momentum. Versus when CEO Cleo, the center of mass, is out in front, forward, it speeds up team momentum. So let's look at that a little bit more closely in the gait cycle when this occurs. We'll start in this balanced position, perfect harmony. CEO Cleo's on top, but they're still working together. All the roles, the hierarchy falls in place. Then we see when the body goes to leave the ground, to propel the body forward, to push the ground back. What happens is CEO Cleo is out in front. He's forward. Boss Betty is backwards. Versus now, when we come to land and load the ground, when we're coming back down from that flight phase, Boss Betty, she's always out in front. She has to. She can't help herself. She has to. But it slows down team momentum. When Boss Betty, when the foot out in front is in front of the center of mass, or CEO Cleo, it slows things down. So we have to ask, can we influence this relationship? Because as we know, the closer the two are together, the less braking. The closer the center of mass, CEO Cleo, and Boss Betty are together, the closer they are, the less braking occurs. And this, of course, we're talking about the taxes, paying the taxes with the ground. And so here down below, we see that distance between the center of mass, base support, CEO Clio, and Boss Betty. So we've got two options. How can we do this? How can we bring these two closer together? How can we approximate center of mass, CEO Clio, and Boss Betty, or the base support? There's two ways we can do it. First option, we can bring the leg, or the base support, back closer towards the center of mass. Or we can bring the center of mass, CEO Clio, the body, forward closer to the lead leg or the base support. Just saying that out loud, which of those two options seems most efficient or effective? Running is about moving forward. Would we rather bring the base backwards, or bring our center of mass or our body forward to accomplish the same task of approximating and bringing the two together? So let's see how this works out and how this looks. So option one, bring the leg back, bring the base support back closer to the center of mass. So you see down below, landing out in front, landing on the heel, versus picture two, commonly said, bring your foot back, land underneath your body, land flat. This solves the problem of braking. It does decrease braking. It brings the two closer together, but it comes at a cost. We're decreasing the distance traveled each step. Ideally, every time we go to leave the ground, we move horizontal. If we're shortening the amount of distance, we're paying less on the principal. This will come into point number two. It talks about step length. They both work hand in hand together. We're going to have to take more steps to get from point A to point B if we're shortening up this distance travel by bringing the foot back underneath. Versus option two, can we bring the center of mass, the body, CEO Clio, forward closer to base Betty or the base support without sacrificing distance? So if we look down below, how can we turn this in simple shape, going from braking, landing on the heel, to making this more efficient, less braking? The lean, the hankle, hinging at the ankle, by merely leaning forward, which we've talked about before, we'll show continuously, shifting the center of mass forward, CEO Clio forward, closer to Betty. Now we don't sacrifice step length. We can still cover the same amount of ground, but we're bringing the distance closer together. We're approximating, we're decreasing the braking by merely leaning. Option here one, no leaning. Option two, leaning. Now we're minimizing braking to help maximize momentum. Let's get a visual on this phenomenon. This is the secret sauce, the X factor, the leaning, all about the leaning. So here at option two, where we talked about moving our body, our center of mass forward, what does that do? Think of it like this. When you're running, there's this little platform in front of you. It's a safe zone of where you can land and load that minimizes braking. Well, since we don't really have the option here, let's talk about this scenario. If I'm at the edge of a pool, I'm standing on land, and I've got this safe space, this platform, this raft that I can go to. Since I can't really bring it closer to me, I can bring myself closer to the platform. So if you look down below, you see where my center of mass is, right smack dab in the middle of the base support between my arches. By leaning forward, hinging at the ankle, shifting my weight forward more towards the ball of the foot, keeping the heels down. Now I shift my center of mass forward. Now CEO Clio, Boss Betty are closer together. There's less braking. That's the key, the X factor, hinging at the ankle to move the two closer together. You see the relative change in the difference where the platform stayed the same, but it was the body, the center of mass, that moved forward, bringing the two closer together, not sacrificing distance. This brings us to our next employee, Hank L., Employee of the Year. Fantastic individual. He's been Employee of the Year every single year since starting 88 to 2023. He loves discomfort. We grow from it. He's a very grounded individual, brings people together. He's got the parking space and everything. Fantastic guy. What he does is he tells Clio, CEO Clio, center mass, hey, let's lean into this. Let's lean into this discomfort. Let's lean forward. I know we have our differences with Boss Betty, how she runs things, but can we bring these things just a little closer together? So Hank L. helps to lean the center mass forward and bring the two closer together. Great guy. Here's the other thing, where to lean. So we talk about leaning, shifting pressure. What we have to unlearn is telling our body, it's okay. It's okay. Hank L is okay. It's okay to have my weight forward in the base support while we run, while we move forward. Because here's what will normally happen without this training. Down below, we can either hinge at the hips and we have our weight still go back. We're trying to lean forward, but our hips are going back to try to stay centered versus the leaning forward, hinging at the ankles. And this is where the employee comes in of hip E. She's not great. Can't fire. She's got too many write-ups. She just never goes away. She doesn't come in that often, but she's trouble. She's just bad for business. Slows forward momentum, slows team progress. She's all easy, slow down, there's no rush. Not what Hank's all about. Hank L. Sorry, Hank. She's about leaning, hinging at the hips, a hippie. So the goal is, can we learn to get the center of mass forward by shifting the pressure through the ankles? Going back to the picture that I showed in the beginning and how it's more about the location of where you land versus what part of your foot. Down below, all three images, I'm landing on the heel in all of them. But the difference, the most important difference is, where's my center of mass in relationship to that? It's more about where versus what part of your foot. If you go back to the kickstand analogy, here where we're trying not to let it move forward, we're trying not to let it move, we want to have a contact point outside of the center of mass. It doesn't matter what part of that kickstand, what part of the foot, it's more about the location. Is it outside or not? It's more about location versus what part of the foot. So a quick, simple, easy way, if you're a coach, clinician, if you video yourself, if you watch yourself run, instead of looking at the foot strike, looking at slow motion, just by looking at where their body weight is, tells us everything we need to know. By looking at their torso, imagine like it's like an hour hand of a clock. If they're running left or right, ideally, if they have their weight appropriate, the Hankel, their torso is at a 12:30 posture. Versus if they're leaning back, not leaning at all, that's a 12 o'clock posture. So they're forced to land and load in front, boss Betty further out in front. Versus a 1 o'clock posture, the hip E, leaning forward, but the hips are staying back. So my hips are back, my center mass is back, I'm landing and loading in front, braking or slowing down. So I want to finish point number one by showing just another representation combining the two of the gait cycle from what it looks like from the side and where the center of mass is in relationship to the base support with these three different positions or postures all landing on the heel. We're first starting in this balanced position. Lowest point, arms, legs, thighs equal. Right now, I want to see with the base support, foot's flat, where is the center of mass? Where is CEO Cleo at this exact moment? So if we look at these, option one, not leaning at all. Weight's back, vertical, 12 o'clock. Where's the weight? Where's the CEO? The center of mass, it's further back. It's towards the heel. Versus now we're starting to lean, but it's at the hips. So it's a little bit further forward, but the hips, the center of mass is still back. So my pressure, the center of mass, is slightly more forward. Versus the Hankel, shifting weight, hinging at the ankle, biasing more towards the ball of the foot. Right now, leaning appropriately, 12:30 posture, you can see where my center of mass is more towards the ball of the foot. This doesn't mean that I'm pushing down when I leave the ground. This doesn't mean I'm landing on the forefoot. This is merely, where is my weight? Where is my balance when I'm in this lowest point balance position? That's it. So now let's look at the flight phase. Leaving the ground, both feet are off the ground. At this point, there's no base support, but we can see where's the center of mass in relationship to where it started. Leaning back, leaning at the hips, the Hankel. If we have the same relative location of the landing, we can see we're already biasing further back versus closer forward. This is all about that relationship, all about the distance. Now when it comes to the landing and loading, foot out in front, boss Betty out in front, this is where it's at. Where's CEO Cleo? Where's the center of mass? Leaning back, here. Leaning forward a little bit more, but hinging at the hips, a little further forward, this center of mass. versus appropriately leaning at the ankle, hinging at the ankle. Now look how much closer it is to the foot, the base of support, in the center of mass. This is what it's all about. Minimizing as much as possible braking without sacrificing the foot, the distance, and bringing it closer. We're merely leaning the body forward and letting the landing happen. Mo distance, mo braking. It's all about this. How can we get the two closer together? So let's bring this thing home. Again, if we're imagining a fixed center of mass, if we're merely just talking about the goal is landing as close as possible to our body, the heel is closest to our body, to our center of mass. That part of the foot is closest to me. Versus making contact with the whole foot or the midfoot, parts of the foot are further away from my center of mass, braking more. Versus forefoot, even further away. And this is with a fixed center of mass. So the goal, and therefore main point number one, is landing on the heel helps to maximize forward momentum when appropriately leaning. When there's appropriate relationship between center of mass and base of support, the heel is closest to the center of mass, slowing the least. This is the phase we're talking about, the taxit. Main point number two, promoting heel strike. In the grand scheme of things, the zoom out on our main running economy analogy, we just talked about for part one, the momentum, the taxes. Now we're moving up to the payment on the principal moving forward or on the interest going up. Main point two, it has to do with the payment towards the principal. Main point two, here's the quick summary overview and we'll dive into it. Heel striking maximizes forward distance. Also, you could say horizontal distance, distance traveled. What this essentially boils down to is higher payments on the principal, higher payments to the principal moving forward. Greater distance traveled between each step via pushing the ground backwards to move forward and horizontal and landing on the heel. You'll come to see the only option, if you're leaning appropriately and gliding, the heel is the only option. Back to the tried and true, the paddle analogy, how we move forward. The physics, Newton's third law, every action equal and opposite reaction. If I'm in a canoe in the water and I want to move forward, I put the paddle in the water, represents the leg, push the water back, represents the ground, and the result is moving forward. Pushing back, moving forward. We can apply this concept to pretty much all parts of the gait cycle. We don't need to then pick the paddle all the way up out of the water. We can really focus on what actually propels us. Where do we actually think about when it comes to what moves us forward? And so this is where the infamous push with the tush, PWT, comes in. The glute max, the tush, its main action, muscles are our movers, is to extend the hip. So ideally the glute max is pushing the ground back, with the hamstrings, of course, but it's not sexy. Push the ground back. The result is to move forward. Not pushing down and up with the quads and the calves, but pushing with the tush. So ideally, in a perfect world, running and walking, both the same goal, same trajectory, moving forward. What we should see incrementally as you're walking, if you're walking in the sand, if we measure the distance between each step, as you go faster, it starts to incrementally increase the distance traveled between steps. It becomes a point where to go further forward, we need to leave the ground and move further horizontal. But the learned skill comes in of leaving the ground and moving purely horizontal, not leaving the ground and going up and forward. So what we'll see is that ideally to maximize this, landing on the heel is the only option. So what is bounding? Ideally, I should be able to run in a room that's my height in standing. I'm 6 feet tall. I should be able to run in a room and not bonk my head. Why is that? My knees are slightly softened. I'm leaning forward appropriately, and I'm leaving the ground and moving horizontal. If we're leaving the ground and going higher than our height in standing, we're going to call that bounding, the blending of jumping and running. Versus more gliding is leaving the ground, moving purely horizontal, not up and forward. We're more leaving the ground and going forward and down to cushion, but not up, forward, and down. And this has to do with the payments. Bounding is what's paying on the interest. Gliding, energy exerted, we're paying on the principle of moving forward of the house. So here's the thing, the trajectory, by staying lower, by gliding, by not bonking the head, we're extending the leg to propel forward. We're horizontally moving in flight time, but the flight time we're moving forward, not up and forward. There's only time to land on the heel. If you're truly kind of skimming the surface, moving horizontal, as you push back, really the only thing that you have time for and the ability to, even if we set the momentum and the leaning aside, the only thing you have time for is the heel, because we're staying low, because we're moving horizontal. Here's the other pearl. When gliding, there's no time to land on the midfoot. The only way to land on the midfoot, landing flat, is to go up. And so if you look at the trajectory of bounding versus gliding, with the trajectory of bounding, it's going up and forward, not as much distance, jumping off the ground, versus the gliding, we're going horizontal. We're traveling further forward. Here's another aha moment. What we do, how we leave the ground will influence how we land. How we leave the ground influences how we land. If I'm landing on the forefoot or even the midfoot, usually what that means is we're pushing downwards through the ground and back. The only way to push down is with the calf muscles, pushing down through the ball of the foot and the quad to go up, versus we push with the tush, where the quad and the calf are matching the ground so we're not collapsing, but then where the power comes in, where the concentric activation, the shortening of the muscle to propel us forward comes in, it's the glutes pushing back. So what you'll see in this image of bounding versus gliding, look at the other foot. It's a tall tail sign. Look at my lead leg and the top when I'm bounding. It's already in that plantar flex position. Why? Because I pushed downwards, plantar flexed through the ground with my calf. The result is going up versus pushing the ground back, landing, not loading, landing with the appropriate lean in front with the heel. This is again interest versus pain on the principle. So here we get another kind of top-down view. We've got simple shapes here. We've got the bounding, what it looks like when we go to leave the ground, pushing down and back, using the glutes as well, but also the calves, and a lot of times the quadriceps, versus the gliding, pushing the ground back, push with a tush, moving horizontal. And you'll see there the relative height of in standing when leaving the ground. With the bounding, the simple shape goes up above that line, versus the gliding, it stays lower, moves horizontal. And if you look down below, the amount of distance traveled with the bounding versus gliding, we're covering less ground. We're covering less horizontal distance, less step length by bounding and landing midfoot. What you'll also see is it's almost impossible, it's extremely difficult to bound, to jump, and land on the heel. Almost always, if you're bounding, going to be landing midfoot or forefoot, which bounding is again paying on the interest. If we were to add this up, this is just one step we dissected. If we were to do this and amplify and compound this over a half marathon, 13.1 miles, even if it was only 1 inch difference, even if it was only minimally just 1 inch between each step, where you're shortening up your stride, you're going up and going forward instead of going forward, and you're shortening up by 1 inch. Over the course of a half marathon, 13.1 miles, what this can lead to is you being this much further behind, having to do more work to catch up. As a result of that 1 inch, we can be 582 meters behind or ahead, however you want to look at it, paying on the interest or paying on the principal, or 0.36 miles back. We're going to have to do more work. We're going to be slower because we're wasting energy over the long haul. And if you want to think about a full marathon, just double that. Let's go over some other foot strike situations. So far, everything that I've talked about, and there's a reason I saved it to later, it's all on a level surface, a flat surface. We need to learn how to run on a flat level surface, and then we can adapt, we can modify whether we're going uphill or downhill. So let's talk about inclines, let's talk about trail running, and let's talk about sprinting, heel, midfoot, forefoot. When it comes to running uphill, ideally we lean further forward. We push the ground down and back. Now it's okay because we need to ascend the body. We need to go higher. So we do now use the quads and the calves to push down and back. So as a result of that, a lot of times, in addition to just normal landing on the heel, if you don't conform your mechanics too much, you'll land midfoot, and that's okay because we need to use our calves and quads to go up. Forefoot, making the effort to plant the ankle down, landing on the ball of the foot in front, still slows down, inefficient when going uphill. When it comes to going downhill, ideally we're slightly leaning back. Our lean is kind of like our throttle, letting the hill, the decline, do the work, and we're landing on the heel and a little bit more in front of us to try to slow, to kind of control. We're trying to let the hill do the work. We don't want to fall on our face, safety above all. It may also lead to landing on the midfoot, depends on where your lean is, going downhill, and that's okay. Versus the forefoot, it's extremely inefficient to plant the ankle down and land on the ball foot when you're going downhill. No go. When it comes to trails, safety above all, we don't want to fall. If you're running on a surface that's uneven, you've got roots, rocks, what have you, we may adjust our lean. We may not want to be leaning as far forward, controlled fall, because if you hit your foot, you're going to fall. If you're doing it right, you will fall fast and hard, and it doesn't feel good. I've done it before. So you may then choose to shorten up your stride, to take more steps and shorten up that distance. And as a result, you may land closer, you may not push as far back, and you may land on your midfoot. And that's okay. Safety above all. Forefoot though, running on trails, still going to be bounding, still going to be braking, landing out in front. Let's talk about when is it okay actually to land on the forefoot. So when it comes to sprinting, running forward, running faster, ideally it's the 3 F's. We don't change the mechanics. If you drive your car faster, it changes gears. You don't change the mechanics, the mechanism, how you move forward. If you're riding a bike, you don't change your mechanics. We're doing the 3 F's. We're pushing the ground back with more force, further back, and at a higher frequency. And when it comes to sprinting, it's such short distances, it's maximal exertion, maximum power. Efficiency isn't as important. It's such a short distance. So they may also still land on the heel. That's okay. They may land on the midfoot. They may choose to stay on the forefoot. They minimize ground contact time by only landing ball of the foot, maintain some of that springiness, that elasticity, and the heel doesn't spend as much time going down. They're just making minimal contact time on the ground, trying to increase that turnover rate extremely fast, and they may land on the forefoot and pretty much stay on the forefoot. And that's okay as well because it's such a short distance, because it's all about power, not about efficiency. Summary and final thoughts on heel strike dissertation. When appropriately leaning forward, landing with the heel improves 2 things. Improves your forward momentum and improves your step length, your horizontal step length, distance traveled. How we improve forward momentum? By landing closer to the center of mass versus increasing step length, traveling further horizontal. How do we do it? By leaning the center of mass forward in the base support, Hank L, pushing CEO Cleo forward out of his comfort zone, thus bringing closer to Boss Betty, minimizing braking, and versus the step length, increasing horizontal distance, pushing the ground back, moving horizontal, landing on the heel, not trying to shorten up the step and the distance in the front. More simply put, Hankel, hinging at the ankle, and push with a tush. Those 2 things, what is a characteristic of those, which helps maximize running economy, paying on the principal, minimizing taxes, landing on the heel is a part of this. To land on something other than the heel is going to take some more work or effort, or we may lose out on that running economy. Final thoughts, what it all boils down to. Again, I'm trying to help share, and if you are happy, runners, if you are happy and healthy, I don't care how you land. I don't care what part of your foot. If you are happy and healthy, I'm happy. You do not need to conform to what I'm saying if you are doing just fine. But There's a reason why the running injury risk is so, so, so high. And I'm a physical therapist. I'm seeing these people countless times being injured. I got burnt out. I spent a year away from patient care to try to reach you before you get to that point. I felt like I was just cleaning up messes. People are already hurt. Can I try to get this information to you before so you don't need to come in and be injured and you can run for your mental and physical health? So again, you're happy, I'm happy. I'm back to treating patients again. I missed it. However, if you are interested in learning to run smarter, safer, and faster, consider learning how to hankle, learn how to push with a tush. Clinicians and coaches, try incorporating some of these drills in addition to just strength training and mobility work, teaching efficient movement, moving horizontal, minimizing braking. Use these same drills and cues, that's okay. Consider teaching these skills, teaching how to glide to help your runners improve their injury risk, and hopefully not just treating the symptoms, not just treating the calves that are tight. You treat them, they loosen, they tighten again. Let's go after what's causing in the first place. Let's not use the calves to propel. Let's not use the calves thousands of times so they don't get as tight, so we don't need to drive needle and we don't need to do soft tissue work. Can we go after the mechanics first, and then we can also include strength training and mobility? Here's some resources. I've got free information. I've got YouTube. I've got a podcast. I've got Instagram. If you're looking for auditory learning, visual learning, long or short form Instagram, long form YouTube. If you're looking for training programs, classes, I've got a Learn to Run membership where it's a monthly fee. You get access to all my training plans, 5K through full marathon, beginner, advanced versions, whether you're looking to PR or just finish without being injured, and then have different ways that you can learn these skills of the mechanics to glide. Option 1 is 7 skills, where you learn 1 skill a day in order to do these, to learn the hankle and the push with a tush. I've got the tennis ball necklace experience, where you can use a tennis ball filled with pennies or washers, and using that to teach you arm swing, leaning, and gliding with feedback from the ball. And then my latest one, which has been getting a lot of good feedback, is the Learn to Glide. Learning how to first lean, standing, then while walking, then while running, and then how to glide, how to propel using the glutes, first in standing, then walking, then running. So regardless, thank you so much for being here. If you've got to this point, I applaud you. Thank you for investing in your future self. Thank you for allowing me to be in some small way on your journey. And I hope that I can help in some way now or in the future. Whether I never get $1 from you, that is okay with me. If you're happy and healthy, I'm happy. Thanks for being here. Let me know what comments, questions you have.